Hello, everybody. Welcome tonight to the forum, the Safety Forum, which is titled Better Outcomes in Public Safety and Crisis Response. My name is Tracy Ullman. I'm going to be moderating this evening. I want to offer just a few logistical things before we get started. For those of you who are in the room, there were question cards that were handed out on your way in. We'll collect those throughout and at the break. There's bathrooms, they're right outside the door. You take a quick left and then a quick right. For those of you who are joining online, I believe we actually have around 70 people registered to join us tonight online. I want to welcome you as well, and then encourage you to also turn in questions. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of your meeting, meeting screen. So thank you again for coming. We actually have quite a full house, and I wanted to just take a few minutes at the beginning to say some special thanks to some of our guests, Captain John, Devaney, our Rick Krager, our CFO for the county, Matt Weatherdahl, Juvenile Department Director, Commissioner Malone, DA Haroldson, City Councilor Tracy Yee, Damian Sams, Department Director of the Health Department. And then I also understand that Commissioner Weiss is on tonight's online meeting. As many of you may know, the Justice System Improvement Program began back in 2018, and for the last 5 years, Benton County has been looking over internally at services it provides and has met with a broad range of agencies and stakeholders, as well as technical committee, community advisory committee, and over 20 public engagement sessions have been held. And the purpose of tonight's forum is to provide the public with insights into what's been learned. For example, the county's role in public safety will be discussed, as well as the things they've learned about current facility shortcomings and constraints, the implications of those shortcomings and constraints on our community safety, and then ultimately to share with you a request regarding an upcoming bond measure. Tonight's agenda is actually quite simple. We'll start with a brief description of what we've learned over the past 5 years. The vision, we'll see a little bit, we'll take a break, and then we'll move into a panel discussion, which will have an opportunity for everybody to ask questions. We held a similar forum last month and learned a few things, one of which was to provide a little more time for questions. There's also some requests for data, and so you're going to see the county lean into that tonight. So again, I want to say thank you for being here. Appreciate everyone's attendance, and look forward to an engaging conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to the commissioner.
Good evening. Oops. If I can fit in here without making too much of a mess of the screen. I've been involved with the criminal justice system assessment and the justice system improvement program since 2017, when I first ran for office. When I ran the first time, the issue that I heard about most from community members was actually mental health, getting mental health assistance for their loved ones. When I ran the second time, a couple of other issues became equally important to community members. One was housing, homelessness, community mental health again, and community safety. So I've been deeply involved with the project for the last several years. I'd like now to turn to my first slide. During the criminal justice systems assessment, we looked at everything, it was touching the system from someone's first encounter with law enforcement, all the way through the courts, the role of the defense, the role of the prosecution, the courts themselves, to their release back into the community as our neighbors. And in that process, we had many meetings with small groups, large groups, public forums and collected a lot of information and data. And in this way, and looking at comparator counties, both in Oregon and across the country, we put together a vision and a goal for the program that you can see here on this slide. So our vision is really evidence-based and outcomes focused. And the outcomes that we're looking for are healthy and stable individuals in our communities and improved community safety overall. Next slide. The planning process, as I already mentioned, began in 2018 with the assessment. We then, during that process, had a series of public meetings, but then took a pause when COVID hit. And we slowed down a bit, but we did form a couple of advisory committees, both a technical advisory committee and a community advisory committee that started to work with us and our pre-designed firm, DLR, on what this vision might look like in terms of real facilities and programs. We've made a lot of decisions as a board over the last couple of years. The Board of Commissioners decided earlier this year where the Community Safety and Justice Campus would be located. We also decided that we would fund the courthouse and district attorney's office outside of a bond measure, partly because we have funds coming from the state as matching money for the courthouse. And we wanted to make sure that we could do that and that it wouldn't be contingent upon a bond. Didn't want to lose that match. I'm going to speak tonight about the resources that we want to add in terms of facilities to expand mental health capacity, restore accountability for offenders, and improve emergency response and community safety. With the assessment in hand in early 2019, we understood the full scope of the issues and how our current system was working and not working, where the gaps were, what we needed to do better, what we need to do more or less of. And we also gained a really good understanding of how our current facilities constrained the kinds of programs that we could offer. We also knew that we would need more staffing for those new facilities and programs. So we took an iterative approach. We started with the local option levy renewal in last year in May. That passed with about 70% of the vote. And that gave us a good running room for staffing up for these new programs. And the types of programs that I'm speaking of are represented there on the left side of the screen. With enhanced crisis response, the CORE project that's joint with the Corvallis Police Department. And crisis center, we're not operating yet, it doesn't exist, but we're planning for it and getting that up and going. And we have additional staff capacity that we did not have a couple of years ago. We're also doing quite a lot of training of law enforcement officers in crisis response and intervention, also in how to respond to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who tend to freeze up when they are when they encounter loud, forceful commands, and then they're perceived as not being responsive to law enforcement, and things can really, really escalate from there. So we are planning to put that bond measure before voters in May of 2023 to put the facilities into place that will help us expand these programs. We are looking at several facilities at the Community Safety and Justice Campus, and that will include new sheriff's office, an emergency operations center, and correctional facility. We know that with lots of the disasters we've seen over the last few years, our current EOC capacity is inadequate. And Brian Lee will tell you more about that. The Emergency Operations Center is also an integral part of the sheriff's office, both in terms of its response to incidents, but also in terms of the kind of capacity it offers, because it's a large facility with a big meeting space, and it will be used for training for all kinds of different skill sets in law enforcement and emergency management. And it'll also be provide space for meetings and just for all around community resiliency. Our current jail was built as a temporary structure. It's cramped, chaotic, loud, and we really need a modern treatment centered correctional facility that has enough space to hold people who commit crimes, but also has the space to deliver educational programs, mental health and addiction services, which really can't be provided in our current jail, where we have just one small community room that has to serve for every function, a dining area, library, you name it. The crisis center is going to be a critical addition to filling a gap in our county's continuum of care. It'll be a treatment-centered facility offering stabilization for adults and a place to meet youth as well, experiencing a mental health crisis, and will be an alternative to both the emergency room at Good Sam and to the jail. Next. Services at the crisis center will be voluntary. People can either self-refer or they can be brought in by a family member or by the core team of CPD and our behavioral health folks. Benton County Behavioral Health has formed a design team that includes many community members on it, including partners in our different community groups and people with lived experience of mental health crisis, so that they can inform our design of the crisis center so that it's the best possible therapeutic space for our community members, but also provides a really good workspace for those people that have to serve people in crisis and that often experience secondhand trauma just in the process of doing that very difficult work. Right now, our crisis mental health system in the county, we have one crisis respite bed. And the other options are the psych unit up at Good Sam or the emergency department or the jail. And none of those are necessarily the right place for someone that's in crisis. The emergency department provides higher and more expensive level of care, and it is needed for some people, but not for everyone. And for some people, it can really be re-traumatizing, and it can be very hard on family members as well. So that's the end of my first portion of the presentation. And with that, we are going to shift modes and the sheriff will be up next, but we're going to show you a short video first.
Benton County Justice System Improvement Program is a multi-year project that began in 2018 with a comprehensive review of the justice system. With the assessment and recommendations as a foundation, the county's vision is to provide residents with a correctional facility that supports an effective, efficient, and equitable justice system. A justice system that promotes community safety and accountability while providing treatment opportunities that address underlying causes of criminal behavior. The current Benton County Jail was built in 1976 and it was built as a temporary facility. So it doesn't have a lot of the updated amenities that you would see in the current facility. Once you come in and are deemed, maybe you need to meet with mental health, maybe you're high, maybe you're intoxicated or impaired. You can't go behind the gate until you meet with mental health or get back to a normal baseline with levels of intoxication. So you go in the holding or waiting, and we only have 4.
The video
So
is
you can
more
imagine
effective
a
with
community
sound.
100,000 people, but you get those 4 people brought in.
There's lack of space for us to be there and to meet somebody in a quiet, private environment. There's lack of space for us to be able to do anything that is truly therapeutic. We do adaptation so that we can, and the staff over there are very good at that. We take very important steps to do the best that we can in the current environment.
A lot of our adults in custody have co-occurring issues or disorders, a lot of things go hand in hand. They can have multiple medical conditions, multiple mental health issues, both simultaneously. And it gets tricky to treat all of that.
We work really hard with the sheriff's office staff to do both ways, keep people safe and healthy while they're in custody and keep people safe and healthy as they're getting released from custody.
Unfortunately, people commit crime, and there is that accountability piece and that consequence piece, and we can't house them here. And so we rent beds in Norcor for our folks that have been given time. And so I can move them from our facility to a facility where they can go up to a year's time without tying up a bed locally.
Sending somebody where those support systems are not, you've just exacerbated or made worse anything else that they're going through by taking them away from their systems of care. You know, NAMI has studies that say up to 2/3 of adults in custody have co-occurring and or mental disorders, mental health disorders. And so us, when I say us, meaning Benton County Behavioral Health, being able to treat them in their community yet also an environment that's conducive to treatment, which would help them grow and to recover and to become healthy.
And then once they're released, that continuity of care of making sure that they have contact when they get out to follow up with a provider and get their prescriptions continued so that they hopefully stay on those medications. And if it's a medication for mental illness, especially, it may reduce the recidivism of them coming back to custody.
The jail is important to the residents of Benton County, in my opinion, because Benton County is pretty broad. And so there's folks that want to see the treatment. And there's folks that want to see the accountability. And there's folks that don't want to be the victims of crime. And they want to know that there's going to be some consequence to folks who commit crime.
Having a new facility and being able to take in everybody who should be brought in and have them stay and serve their entire sentence and better themselves while they're here and then be released in a better place than they were when they came in, it's beneficial for everyone in the community.
For folks in Monroe, Corvallis, Philomath, Adair, wherever it might be. And I can, with a clear conscience, tell them we're doing the best job that we can do.
To come up with more programs and more creative ways and to offer rehabilitation groups and to offer, skills training and to offer life skills training, just to be able to offer those things which we can't now to individuals would improve their lives immensely.
At the end of the day, it's about the outcome. And we want the outcome to be the best possible outcome so they don't reoffend and they can go back and be a productive member of our community. It's good to see everybody here this evening. I'm gonna put my glasses on, then won't be able to see you for a little bit. So we'll catch up in a few minutes. We good? Good? Perfect. My name is Jeff Van Arsdon. I'm the Benton County Sheriff, and it is good to see everybody here this evening. This first slide you see right here, it's kind of a snapshot in time. This is a map off of Corvallis Police Department's very interactive website. And it kind of debunks the myth that crimes don't happen in Benton County or in Corvallis. Every one of those red dots is a crime. And if there's numbers, then there was multiple incidents at that location. And so I would ask all of you, the common myth is that there isn't crime in Benton County. But how many of you can have experiences that can say otherwise in this room? I think we all can. At some point, we've been victimized one way or another. Next slide. This county averages 8,000 to 9,000 crimes each year. As an example, in 2020, nearly 2,000 offenses were reported to our 911 center here in Corvallis. And not surprisingly, in 2022 Benton County surveys, crime was ranked as one of the more important topics to people that were surveyed. As a result, we have an incredibly high fail to appear rate in this county. The trend in Benton County is growing, and the FTA rate or fail to appear rate is up 132% since 2014 and has grown for 6 consecutive years.
And as you can see on this slide, it's almost at 32% as of 2020, and the national average is 5%. We have a critical lack of accountability in Benton County due to the common use of cite and release. And what I mean by cite and release is when I got hired by the Corvallis Police Department in 1997, my first training officer taught me to issue citations versus taking people to jail. Because if you took them to jail, you run the risk of shutting the facility down. It's an old facility built in 1976, and it houses 40. But as I'll explain to you here shortly, it doesn't always get to 40. This graph shows that Benton County has the largest statistical difference between all offenses and arrests compared to comparable counties. You'll see Polk, Lynn, Lincoln, Lane, and Benton, all our immediate neighbors, and you'll see where we sit right there. Similarly, you'll look at the county jail comparisons. Benton County's jail capacity is extremely low for the size of our community. And so this graph shows the jail capacity and what it compares to our neighboring counties. Lane County is, of course, a much bigger county population-wise, so they have a much bigger jail. But the comparable counties, Lynn, Polk, Yamhill, and Lincoln, I apologize, thank you, all are similar in size, and you can see the size of their facilities. We used to rent jail beds at pretty much all these facilities, but we no longer do because those facilities use their own beds. Next slide. You'll see on this slide that due to the inadequate jail space, 50% of the adults in custody are sent to correctional facilities in other counties. I rent 22 beds at Norcor, which is a Northern Oregon Correctional Facility in the Dalles, which means I also employ a transport team that 2 days a week transfers adults in custody to the Dalles and back. I also rent 10 beds at the Polk County Jail. And so again, that transport team keeps 10 people in the Polk County Jail back and forth all the time. Rather than sending our AICs to another jail outside the area, we need to build a therapeutic and trauma-informed facility to be most effective. And we need to keep the adults in custody in this community with access to family, friends, and their support systems, including Benton County Behavioral Health and ongoing treatment. As you saw in the video, or you will see in the video, our current jail capacity is small with only 2 holding cells and 2 waiting cells. I kind of thought the video was good without sound because you had to just take a look at it and you weren't distracted by the noise. And it really painted kind of a grim picture of what the jail really looks like. But with 2 holding cells and 2 waiting cells, that means that the facility is shut down quite often. And a community with 100,000 folks, 4 people under the influence of drugs or alcohol or needing access to behavioral health for whatever reason, come into the facility, they can't go into general population until they get back to a stable spot with the relationship to alcohol or intoxication, or meet with somebody from behavioral health. That means the facility shuts down. So if I have 40 people in the facility or 17 people in the facility, it doesn't matter. When those 4 beds are full, we're shut down. Next slide. 31% of adults in custody need some sort of mental health treatment. Now, the assessment also indicates a significant need for mental health services in the population of adults in Benton County. In 2021, out of 782 total bookings for the year, 127 adults in custody visited a psychiatrist, and 127 other adults in custody visited Benton County mental health, which left about 31% of AICs or adults in custody needing treatment. Additionally, about 1/3 of spending on pharmaceuticals in our jail is for psychotropic medications, which are drugs used to help treat mental health issues, including addiction. What we learned is that nationally, 64% of all people in local jails have mental health problems. This includes mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, addiction, or other illness. Along those lines, the job responsibilities and duties of the Benton County jail deputies have continued to evolve over the past 40 years as well, essentially running our current facility too small, incredibly outdated, and insufficient to provide adequate treatment and/or consistent and robust services to the population we serve. I'm trying to read through my glasses and it gets below the rim there, I can't see. I apologize. We also convene a group involving personnel from the jail, the Benton County Behavioral Health Department, the courts, the district attorney's office, Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, the Board of Commissioners, and representatives from the ARC of Benton County to better address the needs of the AICs in our facility. Additionally, The therapeutic spaces for all AICs housed in this facility will enable the staff to provide needed services with best practices in mind while working in a much more efficient and functional environment. In the end, the outcome of the community is what matters to all involved in the process. We want to provide opportunities to anyone who enters the facility to voluntarily participate in programs that will better prepare them to rejoin the community upon their release with the best possible chance of having a better outcome. Next slide. What you would have seen or heard on that video is that we have a lack of space, and in their current facility, which was built in 1976, just has so many limits for what we want to be able to do. Specifically with Damian Sands here, provide mental health treatment or addiction treatment or anything that might better or assist our adults in custody. We need a modern correctional facility where people can be held accountable for crimes committed in our community and where our AICs, adults in custody, can get treatment for underlying issues in addiction and mental health. With just 40 beds, the jail's too small, and the majority of our folks arrested in our community, let alone provide appropriate treatment for our AICs. It's not an adequate facility any longer. I appreciate your time, and I'm going to hand it off to Brian Lee, emergency manager.
All right, good evening, folks. My name is Brian Lee. I'm the emergency manager here in Benton County. Obviously, I work under the sheriff's office, and basically emergency management is exactly what it sounds like, the process of managing emergencies or disasters. So real quick, one of the main tools we use is what's called the EOC or Emergency Operations Center. Just quick in the room, how many folks have heard of an EOC? That is fantastic and way more than I expected. So just a real quick picture of what an EOC is and where we're at today with our program and as well as the facility. So EOCs and management of disasters are required in Oregon law, as well as best practices in terms of we are public servants. We are servant leaders. We're here to support the community, restore our lifelines, and promote community resilience, right? A common word used, but it really means something after a disaster. Most likely after a disaster, a lot of homeowners move away and never come back. Homes aren't rebuilt, businesses close down. So it's really important to look at things in a holistic manner and take into account the whole community. We're talking nonprofit organizations, NGOs, access functional needs communities, and our community partners. So that's sort of the model that we look at. Within the EOC, we focus on mitigation, so mitigation of hazards, response, which I'll talk about a little bit, and then that longer term piece, recovery. Recovery is the piece that takes months to years after a community is impacted by a disaster. So all disasters begin and end locally. It's something you may have heard before. It's something talked about with FEMA. It's talked about at almost every level. No matter what, at the beginning of the disaster, it's local response, local community impact, local everything. If it's a really big disaster, we may get support from other areas, other communities, as well as FEMA. But when they leave, which is pretty quick, they leave us with the pieces that need to be rebuilt. If those things are not coordinated well, then we're not really being good stewards to our community. We're not taking care of each other. And we live in the community as well. So it's really important for us to take that to heart and do everything we can to restore our life like it was before. So our EOC program consists of a team of 80 plus people combined with our incorporated areas, our cities, as well as some of our nonprofits, our school districts, etc. We train monthly and we work together all the time to troubleshoot our problems. So we just left the training, an all-day training today with our EOC team to support this. Next slide, please. One thing I'll say during non-activation periods is we do focus highly on coordination. So coordination meetings. We have plans, and if any of you have ever seen some of the emergency operations plan, they're a phone book. They're actually way bigger than a phone book, especially now. They don't mean anything unless they're practiced. They're put to use, they're trained on, and they're being facilitated. And all that is great, but you have to have all the pieces of this puzzle to make it come together. So we shared the community lifelines up here. So what does the EOC do? We can say we do response, but we're not first responders. What we really are coordinators of resources and resource management. So looking at these community lifelines here, you have safety and security, food and water, health and medical, energy, communications, transportation, and hazmat or hazardous materials. All of those pieces are community lifelines to ensure the stability of our environment and our community and get things back up and running. If any one of these are broken or damaged or impacted by a disaster, it must be restored immediately. The process of restoration, while we're not swinging the hammer or putting up the power line again, if not coordinated, will be done in a haphazard way and will leave people and communities in a disadvantaged spot. Now, for folks who live in the rural areas, automatically you're thinking, you're right, most of the response is going to be focused around Corvallis. Part of the EOC's job at the county level is to focus on rural areas and how can we support the rural communities through our emergencies. All right, next slide, please. So this is a couple pictures here. One of the pictures up here is our volunteers managing a lot of the donations following the 2020 Labor Day fires. Benton County is the only county in the state of Oregon that received the federal declaration for our support of our neighbors when it came to mass care and sheltering and volunteer and donation management. We had about 12 semi-truck loads worth of donations. Those are new donations that were sorted and organized that got sent out to other impacted communities in our state. So once again, kind of that larger coordination. We will obviously during these events, mobilize, coordinate, and do things out of the EOC as well. But that space also needs to be a staging area for us to manage our volunteers and our other programs. Down here, you have a picture of Crystal Lake in the 2019 flood, as well as some wildfire, basically traffic getting backed up in wildfire incidents. So emergency management and our EOC also facilitates evacuations, evacuation notification, damage assessment, and that's how a lot of folks, if possible, will get money from FEMA, as well as process insurance claims. We focus on debris management, removing all the hazardous materials and waste from your property once that stuff comes down, and restoring our roadways and infrastructure. So again, our focus here within the EOC, the program and the facility is stewardship and resourcefulness and efficiency. If we're not going to spin up extra governmental structure to get in the way, but we need to make sure all of our efforts are being coordinated and used as efficiently as possible. A couple quick stats and numbers here. During the 2020 Labor Day fires, the EOC was activated. They had 80 personnel activated for 15 days straight. Those were working 14 to 18-hour days, and that does not include our hundreds of volunteers that came through that needed to be processed, vetted, and managed through some sort of process. During COVID-19, I know no one really wants to hear about that anymore, but we stood up the EOC for 18 months. It actually was a huge toll on our staff. It tested a lot of our plans, a lot of our county and city operations, and we had about 150 personnel activated for those 18 months on a rotating cycle. And we managed everything from PPE distribution to the mass vaccination clinics, as well as mass testing sites. So the scope of our range is really all encompassing. So it's not just your normal natural disasters, it's every type of emergency you can imagine. During the larger events, there's been a couple other smaller ones as well. April 2019 flooding is one of those. The Salem water crisis is another one. And then February 21 winter storms as well. So a lot of things we do are really behind the scenes. You might not hear everything about it, but you might see some information from our public information teams coming out. You might see information about road closures, things being restored, timelines, and other incident information. There's also a lot of things happening behind the scenes with this EOC team for monitoring type events. And one of those I'll just highlight real quick is the chlorine shortage. How many folks are available of that chlorine shortage that happened? Couple. Corvallis was very close to losing their potable water due to a chlorine shortage caused by a fire and supply chain issues up in Washington. So that is something that we started our process of managing the chlorine locally, as well as how we're going to redistribute chlorine and get some from other counties and how that transportation process would look like. Luckily, it was not needed. However, those things are happening on a weekly or monthly basis. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk about our current EOC facility and why I'm standing up in front of you and talking about this in regard to our public safety. So our facility is integral to public safety. The commissioner mentioned that this facility is used for coordination meetings as well as trainings. We talked about some of our crisis response intervention team trainings, as well as our crisis response trainings that can take place in our facility. However, we really don't have the space. Our current facility is about 560 square feet. It can handle, if I'm being generous, packed in about 15, maybe 18 people, and our team is 80. So once again, that facility is highly inadequate. Worst of all, it is in classically the basement of the law enforcement building. So big earthquake, you can imagine, probably won't be there. Major flood, it's going to be flooded. And in 1996, the sheriff was actually there, and possibly Chief Rubin as well, in the basement of the EOC there, standing in standing water that was from the flood, still doing response and still trying to respond and coordinate things. So you can imagine, again, communications are hard down there. There's a lot of major barriers. What we found throughout COVID and the wildfires is the space needed is approximately 8,000-ish square feet to support the level of response needed and the level of coordination needed to pull off the things we did. That does not include, of course, all the other staging areas, all the actual sites where we're doing sheltering and management. That is just for our operations team to be able to support the community needs. Last thing I will say, not only about the facility, but our Emergency Operations Center team. Some of these folks are volunteers in the community. They're very, very committed and engaged. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And this facility issue, we had to move EOCs 5 times throughout COVID. And it really caused a lot of challenges with our operations and our ability to keep things moving forward smoothly. So the EOC facility is a huge issue for us. It's the one area lacking. We're always in borrowed space. And once again, that creates a lot of other barriers to our success. Now with that, I will end there. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I understand that I was a little hard to hear before, so I'll speak up a little bit. As we begin to refine what might be included in the bond measure as Board of Commissioners and staff, stakeholders have asked a lot of questions about how facilities will be funded. We're doing our best to maximize the available state and federal funds to help us out, because we know we can't fund everything on the backs just of our Benton County taxpayers. So 20% of the funds for the projected total cost of 166.9 million for all of the facilities that we might propose are coming from federal and state sources. And as I mentioned before, we made the decision as the Board of Commissioners to fund the courthouse and the DA's office through direct borrowing rather than in the bond measure, which is an additional 20% of the cost of the overall project. This leaves us 60% of the project to fund, and we will be considering as a Board of Commissioners what will be in that bond package in December and January of this year. In January, we'll be making a final decision about that. We are continuing to raise funds. We are talking to everyone we can, looking at all possible grant sources and other federal, state pots of money to do our best to buy down the cost to our community. So the other thing I wanted to point out in this regard is that at a bond cost of 95 million, if passed, would cost about $138 per year for the median average home with a tax assessed value of $266,000. And I know that $266,000 sounds really unreasonable in today's market, but what you have to remember is that you and I tend to think of our home values in terms of real market value. What does it say on Zillow? And if you interpret that the assessed value of $266,000, in reality, that turns out to be more in that $425,000, $440,000 range. So it is fairly typical of a home here in our communities. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. This is a preliminary vision of what we're looking at for the Community Safety and Justice Campus, which would be located a mile north of downtown Corvallis off of Highway 20. It would include the courthouse and district attorney's office, the new correctional facility, sheriff's office, and emergency operations center. Access would be on Highway 20. And the proposed correctional facility building, it looks like it's multi-story, but it all is one story. But the housing portion of the new correctional facility has much higher ceilings in order to accommodate the space we need for adults in custody. And the concept plan also shows these green dotted areas around the back of the correctional facility and the courthouse. Those are both potential expansion areas. We're thinking about the future. We don't want to be in 20 years, 30 years back in the same position where we don't know where we're going to build to expand. We need to be planning now for the long term rather than trying to find space in the city, which is really difficult to do. We want to have space for our facilities as the population grows. The sheriff is going to come up and speak again for a moment.
Both probably stay up here. That's all right. One of the questions that's been raised is, will this facility be ringed with barbed wire and lights and things like that? And our architect that we've identified has extensive background and history in building modern facilities. And this facility will be built to represent what is important to our community. As you can see with this rendering, there's trees, there's no barbed wire, there's no giant lights. It's not going to be built like that.
Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to close with is that this campus approach is something that we deliberately chose as a Board of Commissioners. It is a best practice. It will promote efficiency and effectiveness so that we can have shared facilities between the correctional facility and the sheriff's office, for instance, for all of the deputies who work both in the correctional facility and on patrol. We want to improve outcomes for individuals and for community safety, but we want to do it as effectively as possible. We don't want to spend any more of our tax dollars than we have to achieve these goals. So to achieve our vision, we need these new facilities to support the treatment objectives and ensure community safety and individual accountability. But so we'll be putting the bond measure on the ballot next May in 2023, and we really hope that we'll have your support. We look forward to your questions. All of the community questions we've gotten have helped us to refine what we are doing and how we're thinking about this project. And I'm sure that will be the case tonight as well. So thank you. I think it's time for a break.
Yes, thank you to the Sheriff, Commissioner, and to Brian. We will take a quick break. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes at 6:50. And as the commissioner mentioned, the real purpose of tonight is to answer questions and to make sure that we're giving you the information that you need. So if you could, or if you have questions, please raise your hand and Chelsea and I will come along and collect them. If you are joining us online, please make sure to use your Q&A feature, and we will see you back in 10 minutes for hopefully video and a panel discussion. Thank you. For those of you who are in the room, we're gonna go ahead and get the video started, knowing that the folks online might be joining us a few minutes later. So if folks wanna sit back and watch the video, we'll get it started. Okay, Thank you. We're just gonna bring the screen up and seat our panelists here. Okay, I understand that we have lots of questions both in the room and online, so excited to get started. You might notice that in addition to the commissioner, the sheriff, and Brian, we have a couple additional folks. And I would love to ask Nick to introduce himself.
Is this on? You can hear me. Okay, hi, folks. Nick Kurth, I manage the Justice System Improvement Program for Benton County. Have been in this role for a little over 2.5 years now. Welcome.
Hi. Hello, hello. It's green. There it goes. How about now? A little bit better. I'm Ken Rubin. I'm the police chief in Philomath. A little background, I've been a police officer for my 35th year. I met him. I basically trained him. He's learned everything that he's learned from me when I was a detective at Corvallis PD. But I worked at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for 10 years, Corvallis PD for 5. I was a special agent in charge at the Oregon Department of Justice Criminal Division for 14 years before I became the police chief in Philomath, and I've been here for 8 years. That's me.
Right.
But, and they spelled my name wrong, by the way. It's R-U-E. I had a Reuben sandwich for lunch. And that's how you spell a Reuben sandwich. Just throwing that out there. But
You brought good material.
yes, I did.
I'm blessing.
All right. Well, with your permission, I'd love to jump right into questions. As I mentioned, we had a mental health forum last month, and if you didn't see that, the video is available online so folks can go back and watch it. But one of the takeaways from it was that we needed more time for questions. And so tonight, I think we probably have at least another 10 minutes than we did before. So hoping to fill it up here. The first question, I have the same problem as the sheriff. In a sense, we legalize drugs in this state and then seem surprised we have a mental health and homeless problem. Can you explain why we need to once again pay for a problem created by our politicians?
I think we would have slightly different takes on that. We might have a couple answers. But I'm going to jump in first.
Go.
There aren't simple answers. That's part of it. We made drug charges misdemeanors, and that was working fairly well. It provided incentives for folks to get into our drug treatment court and to get into a court mandated and a real wraparound and supportive treatment. And that was working for some people. We couldn't help everyone. But then the voters chose to change our system and to shift those drug possession charges to violations. And the way that that was framed in the initiative was that a citation with a nominal fee would actually be an incentive for people to get assessed for their substance use disorder and get into treatment. But I don't think that that was ever really the way that it was intended to work. It was intended to really create more capacity for behavioral health overall in our nonprofit organizations across the state and at the county level, and to get people into treatment slowly, because most of the time it's difficult to get someone to get sober when they don't want to be. So there's, and that's true for a lot of people. It's also not true for people. If you're so far involved in drugs and you're taking substances that have messed up with your brain chemistry so significantly that you can't make decisions anymore, other than wanting that drug. A violation's never going to do it. And a relationship with a provider probably won't do it either. You need that time to clean up. So I think what we've ended up with is going from, over here to the other extreme. So we have to find a way as a state to balance it out and allow for people to have that time to sober up and to understand what it means to be straight. And that is not necessarily in jail. So we also have to provide for those resources for people to get clean with support somewhere, and we're not there yet.
Thank you. Another question here is, if the entire new facility is built, will everyone be moved out of the current law enforcement building? And if not, who will be left? And what is the plan for vacated facilities?
Well, I can answer the first part of that. And currently, we share the facility with the Corvallis Police Department. And so we occupy the second floor, Corvallis Police Department occupies the first floor, and then we share the basement. If the new facility, once the new facility is approved and built, we would vacate that second floor and the interest we have in the basement. And we would then negotiate, I wouldn't, the commissioners would then have to work with the city to figure out what we're going to do with the remainder of the facility. And I guess at that point, I would hand it off to Nick Kurth or Commissioner Israel.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. Corvallis, City of Corvallis recently completed a facility study across all of their facilities. It's online if you're interested. And they actually identified 3 options for the law enforcement building. The option that they favored most was would be dependent on the county leaving the facility, presumably if we built our own sheriff's office, which is our objective. But what was really interesting about it is not only would Corvallis Police Department occupy our floor, but in addition, they would build another 7,000 square feet for growth, increase of about another 25%. And to me, that was how strikingly crowded these 2 law enforcement agencies are right now in that facility. It's I've occasionally heard comments about building a Taj Mahal. Well, I can tell you, when you see that CPD could occupy the entire law enforcement building, plus build another 25% for the future, you realize there's nothing Taj Mahal going on. It's just that we have outgrown our facilities, and that's pretty much true across the board.
Kind of glancing through these questions, there seem to be a few proposals for alternatives to purchase or to making a campus. So I'm going to pose a few of those questions right in a row. The first one is, can the large mental health facility located off 99 West between Eugene and Junction City be utilized to house prisoners?
That is a state property. That's part of the Oregon State Hospital System. And we cannot use that for county purposes. It is, the state hospital already does house adults in custody. They're not able to aid and assist in their own defense. And that is a precious resource. There's not enough of it. We have people sitting and waiting in our jail in order to get to the state hospital for that restoration to competency. So no.
Thank you. A similar question, somewhat related, is the Emergency Operation Center used for search and rescue? And why can't the county lease space for an EOC in the short term?
Yeah, absolutely. The Emergency Operations Center can be used for very large search and rescue incidents. A lot of times, based on the nature of most smaller scale search and rescue, we're thinking of a lost hunter, lost hikers, etc. That really does need to be done in the field to coordinate field response resources. However, in some of the larger cases, major kidnappings and major incidents, they would utilize the EOC, especially when you start to get involved in multi-jurisdictional impact, multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions, state, federal. Once that starts happening, absolutely, they're going to need the EOC, since the field operations are only going to have so much space in our, basically in our small, tiny RV. And then as for leasing space, if someone had some fantastic idea, that sounds great because we looked long and wide for space within Benton County during COVID to lease. And it was actually the best case scenario since most facilities weren't doing events, most things were open, and it was still extremely challenging to find anything. We did settle on utilizing not only some of the county facilities and bouncing around different city facilities, but we did end up at OSU at LaSalle Stewart Center in the art gallery. It was far from ideal. We were all spread out. It was open to the public, so we regularly had members of the public literally walking in at times into the EOC, into some of our planning discussions, just not knowing because we couldn't actually put up barriers and they couldn't fully close it off to the public because they still had art shows. So short answer is we could if there was adequate spaces to lease. We don't have a large expo center. We don't have those kind of things that we could just leverage immediately. And the other factor is that might help with some of the mobile operations where we operate out of literally a duffel bag with our chart paper and notepads, but it doesn't help us on the technology side. We ran into immediate issues when we utilized some of the city of Corvallis facilities with network connectivity, and it brought all of our operations to a grinding halt. So we had to go paper version. And for folks who know, sorry, I won't make it long-winded, but every piece of paper you scratch notes on is a legal document during an emergency response. It's part of the FEMA reimbursement process and claims process, so it cannot be destroyed. So it generates a lot of extra storage needs and has to be stored forever, unfortunately. So those are some of the barriers to it. And then last but not least are the communications. Most of our emergency operations center, including the one in the basement, has communications with dispatch, as well as ham radio communications and alternate radio systems in place. So if we were to lease a place, we do not have that capability to have additional radio communications, which means if we have cell service, so not public safety power shut off, not major wildfire, not major earthquake, maybe if it's just a flood, absolutely, we could use space, but it doesn't take into account all of our other hazards that could be impacted.
Can you give some examples of pretrial services that the county is presently using to reduce jail crowding? And what programs are planned for the future?
That is a great question. Thank you. I'm actually kind of fortunate here. I have Captain Devaney and Sergeant Keith Hunnemuller. Keith runs our pretrial release program and Captain Devaney oversees the jail operation. So I would ask those two to kind of pipe in right now and talk a little bit about the facility and what programs we offer.
Okay, so for pretrial right now, we're still in the early stages of getting pretrial set up. But what we have done since November of last year was we have a court reminder system. So everybody that gets cited or gets arrested in Benton County, once Keith has a chance to enter it into the system, they're getting a court reminder 2 days before and the day of court to remind them that they have court. If they give us a cell phone number, they get a text message, a phone call, and if they gave us an email address, they get a message on that as well. It has brought down the numbers a little bit that we've seen since we started utilizing that. But we just had Senate Bill 48 come through, which is sort of put a halt on what we could do because they were giving guidelines out as to what pretrial has to look like. And we now have interoperations with the courts to be able to get that going. We actually on Monday are going to are having a place called Scram, a company that does house arrest bracelets and alcohol monitoring bracelets, come down and do a presentation to us about adding those to the pretrial program so that folks that maybe the really cool function of one of these devices is that if somebody's a victim of a crime and their offender has a pretrial arrest bracelet, when they get released, they can actually put an app on their phone and it'll tell them when the bracelet gets within a certain range of their phone, so that it's going to be a good help for us to protect the victims for these crimes. Again, we're getting these things ramped up. You don't know what it takes when we go to hire somebody because we move somebody into pretrial. It's not a quick process. They have to go through backgrounds and all this stuff. So it's not a quick process, but we are moving forward with it and we're farther along than we were before we just started.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions related to recent news articles. So today's GT, there was a lengthy story that additional money will be added to the bond request for homeless. How much money is being requested and what will it specifically be used for? And why is this being added now at the last minute?
Okay,
We have not made any final decisions about this. What we did do at yesterday's Board of Commissioners meeting was direct staff to look at options that we might add into the bond measure to address homeless services. Both, as I mentioned during my opening remarks, homelessness has been a top of mind community issue for the last several years. We've conducted 2 surveys of community opinion so far this year, and in both of those surveys, homelessness was the #1 issue on people's minds. There is a nexus between homelessness and crime. Not every person that's unhoused is a criminal, that's for sure. But there is an element of the unhoused population that is part of our frequent faces population at the jail as well. So we know that there's overlap in these issues. And if we can address some of the issues facing our unhoused community, we also can bring down some of the crime. So they're not unrelated. That said, what we directed staff to do was to bring back options to us. And that's what they'll be doing. And we will be making those decisions over the next few weeks as we put the bond measure together to help address issues that are on that boundary of homelessness and justice system and the behavioral health system.
Thank you. Could someone please explain why there are so few respite beds and chairs compared to jail cells? If so many people being held in the jail are experiencing mental health issues, shouldn't we be investing in more respite beds and not so much in jail cells?
I think I'm going to flip that one over to our behavioral health director, Damian Sands.
Thank you. So Damien Sands, and I got a promotion earlier. I believe I was described as the director of the health department and the deputy director of the health department. So just want to make sure that we're clear on that one. Regarding the question in terms of investment, I think, and Commissioner Ojura did a fantastic job of explaining that this is about responding to a continuum of care. And what she means by that is that there are segments within a full continuum of services that we have in the county for how we can respond. So if you imagine that from the most simplistic of levels to sort of outreach and engagement for folks in which they might be experiencing intermittent sort of conditions and they are getting depressive disorders, and they might have some type of need for outpatient services. And then you go all the way to the other end of the continuum and you're seeing the need for acute services. And what Commissioner Ojuro described was at the state hospital, that would be our highest level of care. So if we consider the state hospital being the end point, we obviously need a continuum of care that has integrated steps from that point to the lowest level of care in which we're doing outreach and engagement. When we have a gap, when that service is missing one of those steps, what we often see is that that burden falls on the additional services around them. And simplistically stating, when you can't take care of someone in a community setting in a traditional manner of outpatient care, crisis services, crisis respite, they're going to land in a different area. And that different area can be the emergency department, it can be through law enforcement, it can be those environments in which an individual who should be getting traditional care from an alternative form of diversion to one where they're landing up in the criminal system. So it would be simplistic to say, if we invested all of this money in crisis and respite, that's going to take care of everything. And the reality is crisis respite is but a small component of a full continuum in which we need to have all of those pieces in place to have success. And you're seeing this burden being placed on these additional pressure points within our system. So, you know, one of the reasons why behavioral health is here to discuss these issues for this new campus is that we recognize this component is being just an essential part of the whole continuum of care. So yeah, it is a complex gray issue, and I wish that there was a simplistic answer to it. So to sort of hand it back over, I really do hope people hear the understanding that from our standpoint, we do need to build these or fill in these gaps that we're currently experiencing in our community. Thank you.
I would take just another small step. The folks that are in custody that have mental health issues, some of them we could have averted, right? If we had the investments upstream so that they would not have run afoul of law enforcement in the first place, and perhaps never ended up in jail. Some of them, especially those with co-occurring substance use disorders, some of the drugs these days, the fentanyl, the methamphetamine, are psychosis inducing. And what we have been seeing across the country, not just here locally, is that there are an increasing number of people with psychoses that it's very difficult to diagnose because it's hard to tell whether it's drug induced or whether it is a mental health disorder, or both. Or, don't know what the long-term prognosis is until that person cleans up. So it's those complex cases that I think that we're still going to have to deal with. We'll have people like that in the correctional facility, and we need to be able to meet them where they are and give them the best treatment possible so that we can then figure out what the best place is for that person. Right now, we can't hold them, or if we do hold them, they close the jail because we only have 4 holding cells.
Something here. Is my thing working? Hello? Hello? I like to talk about practicalities and in real life scenarios. Whoever asked that question is a great question. But if you take a step back and look at a real life scenario of what could happen and what does happen on a regular basis is where you kind of get to the understanding of respite beds and all in these different levels. The question is, if you've got a serious crime that occurs, let's say somebody that has some of these issues hits somebody over the head with a pipe, and they've committed a serious felony and sent somebody to the hospital. I bring that up is because that happened recently, and that person may need these services immediately, but the person's also committed a major felony crime that we have to find a place for that person so they A, stay in jail until they can get these different services. B, we have a victim that's gone to the hospital that needs services. And then we have the whole legal system that goes on top of everything, where a person needs to be prosecuted by the DA's office. We're worried about protecting lives in a city of Philomath. So if this person gets out because they can't hold them in custody, the person's out. And then he's out, he or she is out, has already committed a felony crime, needs these services, doesn't have them. And 3, we're going to come and recontact with that person because the person's out in our community and has a known victim potentially living on a street in our town. So it's not as simple as, hey, this person needs this spot, because the complexity is of all these different things happening. I'm just giving you one example. It's a real life example, and those happen regularly where they have to be balanced throughout the system. So I just wanted to add that, talking about real actual cases.
Thank you. A question I'd like to ask Nick to start us off with. We've heard a lot of commentary about the buildings that are proposed. Why wasn't the downtown area chosen, and why wasn't that option taken?
Well, it actually was looked at extensively as an option. So we had both a technical advisory committee that was stood up in late 2020, as well as a community advisory committee. And DLR Group, who was our design and engineering firm, was hired to basically develop and discuss with these advisory committees, as well as internal staff and leadership, conceptual designs. And by that, I mean looking at a downtown campus versus an out of downtown campus. And for those of you who've been following the Justice System Improvement Program, we actually identified 3 options initially in that process, one of which was a downtown campus. But at that point, reality starts to kick in, and you have to start knocking on doors and seeing if you can purchase the land that you need for a campus. We don't actually own enough land downtown for campus unless we were to, maybe bulldoze the historic courthouse, which is not an option. And it proved extremely difficult. We had, in fact, 10 sites identified downtown. and employed the services of a commercial real estate broker. Some of those sites were already in contract. Some were discounted because they were simply too far away, or even maybe most importantly, they would remove an existing service that was vital to the downtown. And that I can't stress that enough. I know there's been discussion about, why didn't you bulldoze the apartments that are on the law enforcement block? Well, those apartments are both low-income housing and they are also transitional housing. And as you heard tonight through 2 surveys, low cost and transitional housing is an extremely high priority. So we would have been solving one problem and exacerbating another if we had bulldozed that apartment complex and built there. Further, and this is also extremely important, you heard Commissioner Ogerow talk about the operational efficiencies of the campus, and it absolutely is best practice design today. Were we to have built a correctional facility downtown, it would have had to have been multi-story. And the financial analysis that I conducted in conjunction with our finance department showed that it would have cost in the neighborhood of $250,000 a year more to operate a multi-story correctional facility downtown. Well, after 20 years, 30 years now with cost escalation and building costs, you've paid for an entire correctional facility. A point as an example, and I like real world examples as well. Lincoln County has a multi-story facility. They're not even using one of the floors because they can't absorb the cost. And so it just did not seem a practical, smart direction to go in. And as you can see, we are heavily supportive and behind having an efficient integrated campus with room to grow. That would be the final point, that downtown there would not be room to grow. So we would be sitting here 20, 25 years from now, going through the same exercise and going through all these studies again. And so that was not a desirable outcome.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions that are specifically focused on specificity around outcomes. So I'll ask one that captures it. One goal appears to be to improve outcomes. What are these outcomes? Voters want convincing data that outcomes will actually be improved.
One of the things that was included in the original assessment was a recommendation for data and evaluation and for having a real clear way to demonstrate the outcomes of our work. We have a handful of metrics that we know that we would want to track. A decrease in the failure to appear rate is one of them. A decrease in the citation and release of folks is another, but those aren't the outcomes for individuals and improving people's lives. Those are systems outcomes and kind of a measure of how the process. The biggest one for me is a reduction in recidivism, or the rearrest rate of individuals. And we want to see that go down. If we're doing things right, there won't be as many people arrested over time, because we will have been addressing some of these issues upstream in terms of substance use disorder, mental health challenges, basic criminal behavior. And I would have to say that we do a fantastic job in this community with our juvenile department. They're really great at supporting kids and keeping them from going down that path. But we still have crime, and the county's growing, and we end up with a lot of people here from outside the community as well. So, yeah.
First, I'm going to say there's an acronym here that I don't know, so it might be a test. Important to also consider how to keep LEO encounters. Okay, to a minimum. Okay. Thank you. Is there work on diversion programs to offer more constructive options than jail?
Let me address one part before he's thinking. Let's take a step back and talk about that question. Is interesting because you're talking about reducing law enforcement contacts with criminals, people that have disorders, all those things. Well, they've talked about this in kind of overarching terms of the cite and release and fail to appear. What that really means, if you think about it, is if we have somebody that fails to appear, let's say we've made an arrest for something minor like theft, felony theft. Well, and that person fails to appear. When a deputy at 2 o'clock in the morning stops that car, that is the driver of that car is the person that fails to appear, that person knows they failed to appear. The officer that's stopping them doesn't know it. So you're talking about use of force and the potential of a pursuit and all those things that you don't like to see on TV when cops are chasing people and arresting people and they're rolling around on the ground. And those things happen because of increased contacts when the bad guy knows they're going to jail and the cops don't. That's number one. Number two, the cite and release is even worse, in my opinion. In my years of experience, this thing has got so ridiculously out of hand where we arrest somebody for an assault or a domestic violence situation, and we have to cite them and release them back in the community with a victim that's now been victimized once, but victimized again. And then when John's office files criminal charges on that person, say John, the district attorney sitting over there, we are tasked to go back out and re-arrest a person that's already been cited and released for a crime. So they basically get arrested twice. So we have to come in contact with somebody that's not in a good mood, that go to jail a second time for the same offense because we've had to cite and release them because we don't have space in the jail. I know that's not the exact question, but that is the overarching piece about reducing law enforcement contacts. And when we have a county and a jail system that we have now and a mental health, the lack of mental health space, those are the things that happen where you're increasing law enforcement contacts exponentially because we don't have the room and the systems to handle it. Does that make sense to everybody? Just as a practicality, what we do every day. And we re-arrest people every single day that have been arrested already once or twice on crimes that they've either FTA'd or we've had to cite and release them because we don't have space for them. So just want to throw that out.
A recent example of that is one of I think it was a city officer contacted a person at their vehicle. They had 15, I believe, failed to appear warrants from multiple counties. And it's not just our county that's suffering to this as well, right? So that deputy, that officer, that trooper, whoever it is, sits there and writes out 15 citations for fail to appear. And say that individual also has a user amount of methamphetamine. Well, the will of the voters in the state of Oregon was that's a violation. So that's another citation. So there is some frustration on the side of law enforcement as well, because we're tasked with taking care of everybody. We want to defend you, defend your property, defend your rights, but we also have a responsibility to take care of everybody we interact with, which is what Chief Rubin discussed. They know they failed to appear, so it could turn into something. I want you to rest assured that your sheriff's office, your Paloma Police Department, your Courthouse Police Department has amazing folks working there. And so we feel the burden of the responsibility to take care of all of the overarching things that you've discussed and what we were talking about as far as this, the diversion. That's why we're here. We've got to come up with solutions to these problems. I don't know everything. Ken doesn't know everything. So that's why we're here today. We need help in addressing these issues. And so I know that was a little bit off of what,
Right.
but it's at the end of the day, that's it.
We'll talk about one that this is real life changes that we've had to make recently, just to give you another example. When we arrest somebody for DOII, the booking process takes about 3 hours. From the time we stop somebody till we run them through tests, take them to the jail, book them, do the breathalyzer, or take them to the hospital to have a blood alcohol. So that's 3 hours. Because we don't have space in the jail, the person doesn't go to jail. So we have to release them. And what we've had to do recently is change our policy. We used to tow people's cars years ago that we arrest for DOII for good reasons, but we haven't done that in years. And recently we had to re-establish our towing policy because so many people were getting out of jail. We're getting done booking. We'll be at the hospital writing a report, and the person gets out of jail and gets in their car within 3 hours and they're still drunk and drive away. So we've had to change our policy recently because that happened. It's happened just in Philomath alone 4 or 5 times this year, where we had a guy break into his own car. We've had guys come back and the car, we get out and go back to patrol and the car's gone because the person got out of jail and drove it away, and they're still intoxicated because there's no place and there's no room in the jail to hold them. It's really frustrating and it's dangerous, but we had to change our policy because of that issue. Just recently, Albany PD's changed theirs recently, where we're towing cars. We bring them to our office and then we give them back to the driver after 24 hours. So they don't have to pay a fee, but we just had to get the car off the street because people were getting back in and driving their cars. That, I know it sounds silly thing to have to deal with, but that is an actual real life scenario that we deal with on a regular basis.
We're coming up on towards the end of the panel. There's two questions I want to make sure that we ask, and I think this one will kind of
Okay.
follow. So I'll invite you to get us started, Commissioner. What happens if the bond doesn't pass?
That's something that we've talked about, but we don't have another option. And we know that the jail capacity is totally inadequate. It's not a functional system. The water main burst at the courthouse the other day. We had a flood in the courthouse. The courthouse also obviously really needs to be replaced. It was built in 1888. It's very cramped and small. It's not adequate for victims, families, offenders. There's just no room in that courthouse for people to have any confidentiality when they're going through the court process. We need the new sheriff's office. You've already heard from Nick Kurth about how cramped the Corvallis Police Department and the sheriff's office are in the current law enforcement building. They are literally using every nook and cranny, and people are in what were built as closets. You know, that's just the way it is. So it's failure is not an option. Is the way we're looking at it right now. We really do need to have this measure succeed. We know that many of you will not vote for this measure, but we are really hoping that most of you will, because we need this for the future of the county. We need this for the future safety of our community. Please help us with this investment. I would like to go back to the other question about alternatives. We do have an option in terms of new state grant money for restorative justice programs. We could make a further investment in that arena, as has Lane County, Deschutes County, Polk County, several of the others. There's another opportunity coming up for that investment. And that would be an option available at the request of the victim or the direction of the courts if an offense is such that it would be better for the offender and the victim with mediation to work out an alternate approach to sentencing rather than having someone end up with a record. So that is a system that is, again, in place in Lane County. And we could learn a lot from some of our fellow counties about the kinds of work that they're doing.
The last question that I think we should end on is about the public involvement. And a question just to the panel and possibly Commissioner, how can the public participate in this process? How can they learn more, provide input directly to decision makers?
I will start it off, then I'm going to pass it to Nick. You can talk to any of us commissioners anytime by calling our main office, emailing us. All of our contact information is online on our website. We have this topic is on our agenda regularly as a at the Board of Commissioners. You can come speak during public comment period. We are continuing to make community presentations. If you have a group that you would like to have us present to, we'd be happy to do that. We are making the rounds now and will continue to do so up until May and Election Day. We also have a community survey out that I think is going to be open through the end of the month. And I'm going to pass it to Nick to refer to that.
Yeah, Commissioner Orozco covered many of the points. We have something like 30 small group sessions queued up with various stakeholder groups, community groups, homeowners associations, et cetera. So those will be ongoing. Of course, your participation tonight. We may do a third forum. We're just having discussions about that today, possibly in late January. So that presents another opportunity potentially. Also, we have a community advisory committee that is still meeting, and that information is posted on the county website on the calendar. That's open to the public. I welcome anybody who wants to come join. We have just really wonderful discussions there, and folks that are both new and folks that have been participating since we got in originally formed the CAC two plus years ago. Trying to think if there's any, oh, and then I want to direct you to our new website, which is quite accessible, quite well organized. It's bentoncountyjustice.org. We continually update that website with information, with questions from these forums, with upcoming events. And so that's quite a good resource if you like that, online, easy access kind of information.
I would just add, make sure you are involved, educate yourself, know what's going on. Go to the Board of Commissioners meetings. They're online as well. You don't have to be in the facility. Go to the website. Captain Devaney and I were speaking earlier this week about jail tours. We want to start being able to open up the jail and offer tours to groups. What are the best days, times? Just be involved, participate in the process. Yeah, that's the number one thing with our system, whether you support it or don't. Make sure you're involved. That's all I ask.
So we ran just a little bit over. I want to thank folks for coming tonight. Mention that the questions that were collected, the ones we got to, as well as the ones we didn't, will be posted on the website with answers. Just again, reiterating what the commissioner said, beginning in December, the Board of Commissioners will start beginning those discussions. Those are public meetings, and you're welcome to come and provide comment. And bentoncountyjustice.org is the website that Nick mentioned. So thank you again for your time. And we hope to see you participating. Thank you. For those of you in the room, the folks that are on the panel have also agreed to stick around a little bit and answer your questions if you have some.